Hi everyone, thanks for joining today for our joint Micro Focus and Turnkey mini session. This is the second session today on the multi-factor authentication. Just before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to ask a question, if you use the chat window at the side, then our team will be answering the questions as we go. And then if we get time at the end, we'll pick up any questions. And if we don't get a chance to answer them, what we'll do is we'll answer them after the event. So we have a number of sessions today. This session is around Microsoft Azure and how we can interact with Micro Focus. Then we have that following on with our associate identity management with our Gresham University Arts London. Followed by our Gresham University of Bedfordshire with our managed service piece, and then we have UAL again with privileged access management, and then we'll finalise on the cybersecurity considerations as well with Nick. So today's session is a mini session around how you can leverage your Micro Focus technology to integrate with Microsoft Azure and provide multi-factor authentication across your entire landscape, both in the cloud and with your on-premise software. So I'm Chris Boyle. I'll be your host for the day. I'm the Director of Identity at Turnkey Consulting. I've got 20 years experience in the marketplace, delivering sort of large-scale identity projects across multiple sectors, including higher education. And I'm joined today by Mick from Micro Focus, who'll be taking us through the rest of the session. So Mick, I'll hand over to you for introductions and let you go from there.
Thank you, Chris. Welcome, everybody. I hope we've got an interesting session lined ahead of you. I'm an identity and access management solution consultant at Micro Focus. I've been in the industry about 25 years as well. We've seen a few things in those times, but I'm happy to say we've got some interesting stories to tell you. So without further ado, let's look at the subject matter ahead of us. Microsoft Azure AD and Micro Focus. Are they opposed? Are they working together? Is there any way we could fit the two solutions into a convenient way? Well, let's just dig in and see what we can discover. There are lots of different ways that our customer base works with Azure AD. We don't dictate a single approach for any particular way of working, because no estate will be the same as another from one customer to the next. In the same way that the subtleties of the way in which each organization chooses to work or manage their organization will differ. I appreciate that Microsoft has an incredibly low barrier to entry. They make it very, very enticing and bring lots of features into the play into a purely Microsoft-centric universe. And in many cases, Microsoft would have the Active Directory to be the center of that data universe, the authoritative source of all the identity records, having applications talk to the AD and effectively passing the baton to Microsoft to handle any of the downstream processes. Microsoft being that center of the universe is fine. We can certainly work this way, but lots of fine-grained controls and sophistication could be lost if we pass the baton over to Microsoft at the early stages of that integration, effectively throwing a lot of control down the dark well. A great example of this is how the synchronization of the on-prem AD to Azure AD accounts happens. An entirely Microsoft-centric approach with entirely Microsoft components in the mix would dictate that we would talk to the on-prem AD, which would then synchronize with an Azure AD Connect, and that would deal with the integration with the Azure AD system. But to understand the limitations of this front door approach, where we're essentially knocking on the on-prem AD to achieve this, loses a lot of the control. And let me illustrate why. And to do so, we need to look into the way the Identity Manager talks to these systems and the way in which our drivers are architected. So let's just take a little look. With the connectivity driven through IDM, Identity Manager from Micro Focus, you're gaining control at a very, very fine degree, with decision-making and complicated and sophisticated matching made easy. The placement of your user accounts, the creation and the actions that need to take place based on business logic that you define. All IDM drivers are typically event-driven. but they can be time-based if you prefer. Remember that we're not just considering a single target application in your environment. Not all of these components are Microsoft. There are likely to be dozens, if not hundreds, of different applications that talk to your identity management ecosystem and all have an influence, either triggering events, changing attributes, or requiring synchronization. When something changes in one, there's likely to be an impact that needs to be felt or realized in another. And it's not a case of a light switch goes on, therefore we lock a door. It tends to involve more of an identity transformation, some coding or some manipulation of that data. We at Micro Focus pull information from all of these different target systems, all of these applications and endpoints, and push back updates to them through our publisher channel, where we read information from the identity sources and then push information back through our subscriber channels. Within those pub and sub channels, there are stages where we pick up the event, we make that matching process, decide how we deal with it, and trigger events and commands off the back of that. And that happens upstream and downstream. If an event requires an action to be taken, whether that's the sending of a notification email to a resource owner or a line manager through some sort of instigation of an authentication challenge or a governance access review or micro certification, it's all possible. We've got the trigger points and actions that can happen throughout. And it's this level of decision making and control that offers real control and power into your hands. We've got this level of control over the data processing, the matching, the placement, the record creation in Active Directory, and then back again through the Identity Vault. But if we only talk to the Active Directory and pass over all control to Microsoft, the sophistication ends at the front door, and we're at the mercy of Microsoft. If you're managing all identities online, we can talk directly to the Azure AD Graph API or provision through PowerShell to the Office 365 services. Both are supported. We could talk directly to classic Active Directory on-prem systems or hosted, wherever they may be. We can use different processes, flows, and logic for each, because it's unlikely that one method would suffice for all. That's something that you're foregoing without taking this level of control. Now, we can talk through the Azure AD Connect, and we should also mention this as well. But now I hope you understand the loss of control that you would experience, but still, it's an option. Each of these approaches is supported and all perfectly valid. What we do is key to the way we operate, and that is to give you control, to give you the options.
So I think what you're saying there, Mick, as well, is that you get the flexibility of, you have an identity vault that contains all of your identities, and then you can talk to either Active Directory, you can talk to Azure, and you can provision those accounts and the access that's needed into both of those systems, but also systems throughout your environment as well. So by having everything within a central location, you can then start making access-based decisions based on information that's not just in Active Directory, but the information that gets pulled from multiple different sources of information, whether that be the HR system, the student system, for example, or the virtual learning environments, etc. And based on all of those pieces of information, you can then start to provision that access within the different sets of Microsoft technologies.
Certainly, but even in a solely Microsoft environment, the rules in which that we use to govern and control the rights of access and the way that accounts are moved and manipulated, and the rules that control the constraints around those accounts could well be very, very different from the on-prem to the Azure AD, from one site, one forest to the next. And what we don't want to do is just throw everything into one conduit that simply pushes upstream. What we need to do is consider each of those endpoints individually and look at the nuances that separate those as well. So it's not always one case fits every use case. But you're absolutely right. Microsoft is one of the large vendors out there, and it's key to a lot of environments. But what if it's not Microsoft? Not every endpoint in your environment will be Microsoft. Not every endpoint is going to support standards that are usually accepted as widely available. We support SCIM, of course, as well as a wide range of other driver types. So whether you're talking through to Salesforce and we talk to the SCIM API or cloud service, we can talk via CSV or delimited file access, REST APIs, SOAP. JDBC, for example, what if we're talking to ServiceNow? There'll be a different route to sharing and receiving and updating that data, all driven through the driver layer. So for example, with ServiceNow, we talk REST. If you're perhaps working with an end system like BMC Remedy, of which there are a multitude of different options out there, we may well have a custom driver or a JDBC type driver or something completely proprietary. With that same degree of control that we offer to a directory-based system, you can extend that into having the same level of control over endpoints on-prem, in cloud, hybrid environments, regardless of that vendor, wherever needed, without having to compromise. So essentially covering all of those bases. But it's important to also note that within that flow, within a typical driver, so connecting that central repository of identity that we call the identity vault to any of your directories, whichever vendor, to all of your endpoints. And we're very happy to feed the Active Directory or the Azure AD and let Microsoft processes take control of anything that flows downstream from them. But if you want full control and the ability to plug into additional elements like identity and file governance, multi-factor authentication, of which we are well known in the marketplace for the number of authentication factors that we offer, the way in which we can chain those together, base them on risk factors, look at internal and external factors that could decide how high or too low the bar needs to be raised for entry, not just at the point of request, but during the sessions, continual assessment of identity, verification, and authentication. Through single sign-on, using a front door of access that allows the federation or the reverse proxying of each of your assets through a convenient manner at the front of the system, talking through to the identity vault, taking a lead from the connectivity with each of the drivers that we have, talking to the wide ecosystem, assessing risk at all stages, and where necessary, elevating privileges through a PAM environment. If you want to control how we manage exceptional cases, whether it be in that Microsoft environment or residing on the outside, we can do that, all under that single vendor network. So really, in summary, we can easily augment a Microsoft deployment, whether it be on-prem, in the cloud, or wherever you like, and provide greater control than a pure Microsoft environment would give you over those processes. And we can hand off to Microsoft wherever appropriate to do so. We can take requests from the Microsoft world and components to drive our processes or deal with the numerous elements that Microsoft can't handle, and then notify Microsoft when we've taken care of the tricky stuff. So really, better together, I think, is the key takeaway from this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we kind of see in the marketplace at the minute is we have, customers where they have, Micro Focus as their identity management technology, and they may have sort of Microsoft as their, AD and Azure platforms for authentication. And some of the challenges that we see at the minute is where they have Micro Focus and Microsoft, and the questions that we get asked all the time is which one should we use? And I think to your point, it is definitely better together. So, you could use either, but having both is actually a much better way, because what happens is that you have the integration with the, your identities are going to come from multiple sources, potentially non-Microsoft sources. So you have that identity vault that contain all of your identities. You can then make those access-based decisions in, should somebody have an Active Directory account? Should someone have an Azure account, and what access should they have? But from a user perspective, users don't necessarily care where they get their authentication from. They just want to be able to log in and use some systems. So the questions that we get are really, if we have Microsoft and Microsoft are doing multi-factor authentication, that's all great as long as the products that they're using are, Active Directory integrated or Azure integrated, etc. But what about those applications that are, not integrated into the Microsoft infrastructure? How do we then provide multi-factor authentication? And it's not really how do we provide multi-factor authentication, it's more about how do we provide a seamless experience so that users still get the benefits of multi-factor authentication, but are not necessarily using Microsoft. And I think that the power of that, of how Micro Focus works, is that you can have you can use, for example, you can use Azure for the Microsoft multi-factor authentication product. You can use that for the cloud-based access, because that's the direction that Microsoft's traveling in. But then you can also you can link that back to the Micro Focus technology and provide that same level of experience, same level of security, and you can do that to non-Microsoft applications as well. So really kind of bringing everything together. Micro Focus can kind of sit at the heart of the the access-based decisions, etc., but actually leveraging both sets of technology to provide that seamless experience to users.
I would also add to that, Chris, that if the Active Directory, whether it be the Azure or the on-prem AD, is the authoritative data source, then use Micro Focus to ensure the hygiene of that data source is good. Allow it to be fed in the correct and clean manner. Because if you are synchronizing between the two, good data in gives a better chance of good data out. And ultimately, if you are using the Azure AD for multi-factor authentication, let us provide you with the right intelligence and the right credentials and the right information to go and make that decision. We can bundle and package everything to Microsoft so they have everything they need to go and take that authentication choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you say, being able to wrap that up in both Microsoft and non-Microsoft tech gives that the power back to the organization, because in higher education, as we know, there's lots of bespoke technologies out there. There's lots of traditional types of systems that are still in use as well, and especially helping universities and higher education institutions be able to kind of migrate to their new platforms. Micro Focus can help with that as well. So yeah, so I guess the team's been answering questions as we've been speaking. Thank you very much for listening to this mini session. If you do have any further questions for us, we'll continue asking questions throughout the day. Just a reminder that we have another 4 more sessions after this. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks, Mick, for presenting to us today. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.